Something magical has happened in the land of planning DIY computers. Every year it's a little bit more of a niche, a little bit more of a specialty, although maybe there's more people to welcome to building your own computer. This is the B860I Lightning Wi-Fi. This is Intel's new platform. We're going to build a Core Ultra 285K in this with the B860 chipset. But the exciting thing is the inexpensive versions of the chipsets for AM5 and for Intel's new processor socket are available, and they're pretty good. And it's weird because a lot of the motherboard makers expected Intel to come out on top, to pull it out with the Core Ultra, and everybody would be really excited about the Core Ultra. I think including AMD, because the 9800X3D has basically been unobtainium. But it turns out that with some updates and everything else, the Core Ultra 285 is better. AMD is still on top, to be sure, for gaming performance. But if you're going to build an i7 or an i9 based system with, 24 cores, 32 threads, performance cores, this can actually get it done with its plucky little 10+1+1 power phase delivery and an ITX form factor and Thunderbolt as well. Let's take a look. So my advice to you, if you are building a small form factor Intel-based machine, is you can actually do it with relatively modest cooling, where relatively modest cooling is a 240mm AIO. And that is, take a good long look at the Core Ultra 285 non-K. That is a processor that will boost up to 200 watts, but it quickly backs down, and you really don't lose a tremendous amount of performance. Now, for our testing, to be sure, we're going to be using a Core Ultra 285K. We're going to push this thing to its limits, but Core Ultra 285 may be worth considering. You could even do a small downdraft cooler, well, a large downdraft cooler on the Core Ultra 285 and still have reasonably good performance. Gen 5 and Gen 4 M.2, yeah, it's all available here. Let's take a look at the layout here. So first up, DDR5. Yes, this is a platform that supports CU DIMMs, and ASRock has tested this platform up to 9333. For me, I've tested up to 8600. 8600 is okay. This is also a motherboard that has one Gen 5 M.2 underneath this large heatsink, as well as a Gen 4 M.2 through the chipset. Now this is amazing because pay attention to your ITX boards. Not all ITX boards have this layout. Some will give you two Gen 5 M.2, but at a cost of 8 of your lanes. 8 of your Gen 5 lanes through the X16 slot. Nope, this motherboard X16 Gen 5 all the way, no options not to give you those lanes. And then you have your Gen 5 M.2 and your Gen 4 through the chipset. I think this is a more reasonable configuration because you can get an inexpensive M.2 for bulk storage, and then you've got your M.2 for, blazing fast speeds. But then you've also got your SATA in case you want to use SATA. And weirdly, on this motherboard is 3 SATA ports. They just didn't physically have room for number 4. That's okay. That's fine. At the top edge of the motherboard, we've got 3 4-pin fan headers, our 8-pin CPU power. At the bottom edge of the motherboard, we've got our audio front panel. And then on the front edge of the motherboard, it's very crowded. USB Type-C, front panel connection, a USB 2.0 header, our USB 20-pin, 5 gigabit, dual 5 gigabit ports. We've also got some analog temperature sensors. There's a 5050 RGB strip header connection at the top front edge of the board, and a second addressable 5050 header just behind the 5 gigabit USB header. Let's take a quick look at the rear I/O on this motherboard. We've got 2 super speed 5 gigabit type A ports and then an HDMI port. Then we've got our Thunderbolt port. And this Thunderbolt port doesn't provide any inbound DisplayPort connectivity. It's just the iGPU. So you can do display out on the Thunderbolt port, but it is the built-in GPU of your CPU. So if displaying on a Thunderbolt monitor is important to you, definitely get an Intel CPU that has a built-in GPU. Then we got a 10 gigabit type A port. Then we got 2 more 5 gig USB ports, and then we got another 10 gig port, and then a USB BIOS flashback port. That's only USB 2. And then we got our 2.5 gig port for our built-in NIC. Then we've got our Wi-Fi 6E solution, our BIOS flashback button, optical SPDIF, and analog in and out. Also in our tiny little ASRock box, we have Some very simple rubber duck Wi-Fi antennas. Would have liked to have seen a higher end Wi-Fi antenna setup. 2 6 gigabit USB SATA ports. Our Phantom Gaming case badge. Ooh, nice. An analog temperature sensor. You can use this. You can shove it into the VRM area of your 5080 or 5090 to make sure that the chokes and the coils and stuff on that 5090 are getting the adequate cooling that they should. And our M.2 screw. Got a quick installation guide and some Velcro strips, but pretty standard fare, really. This motherboard is not meant to be the most expensive option. This is meant to be the reasonable option. So I think this is a good choice, a good pairing for a not insane overclocking build with the Core Ultra 7 or the Core Ultra 9. You could do the Core Ultra 5, but the Core Ultra 5, I mean, when you look at the price versus performance, it's not quite there yet. Now for a little test setup here, I'm using a Cooler Master 240mm AIO, nothing special. I've also got my ADATA CU-DIMM DDR5. This is the 8600 kit. 1.45 volts from ADATA. This is a really good option for the Intel platform if you want the absolute maximum performance. For my testing and validation, I'm just going to use the B860, Intel's new GPU, 12 gigs of VRAM. This is a pretty good deal if you're interested in 1080p and 1440p gaming. You're not looking for the absolute top shelf performance. This is a great deal. In terms of like dollars per frame, it's a good deal. As has been adopted on a lot of motherboards, you have diagnostic color code LEDs. The LED in the top corner there tells you what it's doing. I'm looking for the CPU. I'm looking for the memory. I'm doing a memory test. You need to wait because DDR5 memory training, because I just installed the memory, takes a little while. You might have to give your machine several minutes before you see a BIOS screen. Sometimes it's faster than others. Now it's immediately booting into the operating system that I, sort of pre-set up, pre-dealt with. But because I've changed my configuration here, it has reset my BIOS. We need to go into BIOS and configure it. So now is as good a time as any to do our quick BIOS tour. All right, here's our BIOS tour of the B860I Lightning Wi-Fi. 24 gigs of 8600 PCIe SSD. We go into advanced mode. $97.33. Good lord. And we got a BIOS update. All right. Legacy game compatibility. It's still here. Scroll lock key will toggle efficient cores between being parked. So there we are, PCIe Gen 5 for storage and video cards, because that's new this generation from Intel, on an affordable B860 ITX motherboard that can actually deliver power to this processor and no bottlenecks, at least until you start overclocking. What's the bottom line on overclocking? Well, you're going to need active airflow for this motherboard. One little weird feature of this motherboard is that it does have a fan, but the fan seems to be more for the Thunderbolt chipset than anything else, and that's hidden behind the shroud here. I really wish that ASRock had opened up the rear I/O a little bit. Sometimes they put a little vent at the rear I/O. They didn't do that in this case, but it's okay as long as you have a little bit more airflow over the motherboard than I have in the open test bench. This was fine at 250 watts. At 325 watts, we started to get into a little bit of thermal throttling territory on the VRMs, and they were a little toasty at 108 degrees C. But I added a fan, literally just sitting a fan on the corner of the workbench here, and then it was able to do 350 watts no problem. So make sure if you're going to overclock and do 350 watts that you've got adequate cooling. But really, I think you're better off sticking to like 325 watts on this board, but that's just, my opinion. It is a 10+1+1 power phase design, so you're not supposed to go completely insane. And, if you face reality with these Intel chips, the difference between 250 and 350 watts is not much. It's very little. It doesn't help you in single thread. It really helps you more than anything in multi-thread, but then you start to introduce instability. And so, I would say that if it got you something in terms of single thread, maybe you could get to that mythological 6 gigahertz and lower latency and, better performance. Yeah, no, it doesn't help you with any of that. 250 watts, it's fine. Actually, I think Intel pushed too far. The non-K version of this processor has been surprisingly good. And so, that's why I say, consider a non-K version of the Core Ultra 9 for this motherboard, because that would make an excellent pairing. It's going to be way easier to cool. You're going to have a way more stable system. And the handicap that you introduce in gaming scenarios is negligible. And the multi-core performance fall off is less than 6%. So at least it's stock. So yeah, it is. That's the long and short of it. Overall, a pretty solid motherboard, considering the price point and considering it has USB 4 and considering all of the other features of the motherboard. If Team Red is more your speed, I've got some good news. I have the B850 AM5 version of this coming up next. Look for that. I'm Willis Level 1. If you have any questions or I miss anything or you want to see me do a particular test, hit me up in the forum. I'm signing out, and I'll see you there.